thing on?
You're good.
Okay, well then we'll start. Jeb's a great believer in these gardens, and it's I always worry about rain and stuff like that, but Jeb and Barbara both have this feeling it always works out, and it does, and it is so beautiful here. So once again, here we are. Obviously, you may have to speak up a bit. Those of you that like to mumble their work, don't do it. Please do speak up. Turn off your cell phones. Good. Thank you. I have no remarks for this except just to say this is one of the two nicest events of the year, and it's not because it's over and because we're all done, although that gives it a certain air of festivity, but it is really because these are 5 poets tonight and 5 fiction writers tomorrow who really are headed out, and we want to send them out with their own words behind them, and we know they'll do well if that's what they have behind them. So, welcome to all our dear students, to their family and their friends and undergraduates that have come out of loyalty to your teachers. It's a wonderful group. And we have a slight change in the order, but I'm not sure I get it. But the students know what it is. Is that right? That's right.
Call up Greg Salon.
Greg. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to be introducing Melissa McNulty. Melissa McNulty has the biggest smile in the MFA program, a fact which finds its parallel in the openness of her poems. Reading over the work that she has compiled over the 2 years she's been here, I'm struck by certain lines, so beautifully unabashed and embracing, they're like a stranger suddenly throwing her arms around you in the street. The first poem of her thesis, Buzzards Bay, begins with an announcement. I come from the one side of Cape Cod, she writes, where there is no ocean, only a man-made slice of water cutting through town. For Melissa, it's a start which is true to form. If there's a single current running through all of her poetry, then it's an obsession with origins, most often the myth of the self, but others too. In her poetry, Melissa trains her fierce, inward-looking eye on the past. She goes into the treasure house of her childhood, and there searches for those early, primal scenes which are so difficult to contain. When she's found them, she draws open the curtain, lets it all play out. Melissa doesn't seek to examine life in her poems. Instead, she gives herself a more difficult task, that of simply holding life out. As one of her classmates, it's inspiring. There's something about the strength, courage, and honesty with which Melissa writes about her mother, for example, that rubs off, gets one to begin to think about one's own mother, all of that early, informative love, the pain and the strangeness too. Melissa will be missed, but for now, let's surrender to the embrace of her poetry. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. So, as Greg mentioned quickly, my graduate thesis is entitled, well, he didn't mention this. My graduate thesis is entitled No Ocean. It has essentially 2 title poems, which serve as the beginning and end of the collection, and this is the opening poem. Buzzards Bay. I come from the one side of Cape Cod where there is no ocean, only a man-made slice of water cutting through town, a rusted bridge the trash train crosses twice each day, empty going, full coming back, and the same squat barges passing underneath. The Santa Mercedes, an old snowbird cargo ship, retired to the throne of the Maritime Academy dock, sails once each winter to Lisbon or Barbados, brings back nothing but a hull full of seawater. My mother was the only cook at the port-o-call, fixing meals for leathery bikers from Louisville or Duluth. Years later, she retells the same story about that dank galley of a restaurant, how once the bassist for The Who walked in, hearing there was nothing better to sop up the mess of sleepless nights than Christine's cornmeal pancakes. He sat for hours in the front booth by the window, said he was shipping out the next morning on a UK reunion tour, and he wanted her to run away with him. My mother grabbed me up, cupped a hand over my mouth so I could not shatter the fragile dart. I was 5, sleeping in an oversized t-shirt on the pull-out couch of her boyfriend's fishing cottage. She had yesterday's jeans pulled on under her nightgown, was missing her left sandal, and instinctively, I did not ask why. I tried to time my heart to the offbeat of her one bare soul slapping wet ground as she ran with me in her arms toward the water. Children in Buzzards Bay are warned never to walk the rocky edges of the canal. We know riptides and undertow the names of those who never came back. But that morning, as the sun rose over black waves, a cruise liner was crossing through, so immense it was inches from scraping the shore. This ship, my mother pressed her words against my face, is headed far away from here. Then she let me go, watched my small body step onto jagged rocks, arcing forward, further, until my fingertips could touch that ship's cold side. My father in pieces. My father has 2 separate stories of how he became an amputee. My favorite is the one about the war. In this story, my father is a hero. On the early morning of Tetwin dawn, when the trees are decorated with good luck charms, my father throws his weight over a young woman on a bank of the Mekong before being struck by 100 glittering bits of shrapnel that shatter the bone. In the other story, his leg is dragged under a 52 BMW motorcycle as it curlicues across the New Mexico freeway. This is during the year he spent on the commune, chewing peyote, hand-sewing cotton onesies for other people's children. He has changed his name to Riverwind, has no license to show the police. This is the story my mother believes. In it, he is running away. I was raised by a single mother, but I had actually a lot of father figures in my life. When I was growing up, most of my mother's friends were gay men, actually, and they helped raise me. I was 3 of those friends died of AIDS while I was still very young, too young to understand really what was happening. One by one, they got very sick, and I watched my mother care for them, and then they died, and I, meanwhile, tried to make sense of this. This poem deals with that experience. For Teddy. My mother would clean his house after he could not, his legs like kindling under the patchwork quilts his close friends had pieced together. The panel my mother sewed held an embroidered tree on white silk without leaves, only a few pink buds kissing the branches. She'd stayed awake almost 48 hours, fixing hints of gold thread into the textured bark, only to rip them out again, restitch them, as if a thing could not be made beautiful enough. Those 2 days I kept quiet, watched, scrounged for food in the cabinets I could reach, slept on the couch to feel her lamplight on my face. Once, I found a picture of him behind the cookie jar in his kitchen, a pink sequin skirt, smooth legs flexed in red stilettos, his powdered skin shimmering under stage lights. On a back corner, in swift pencil, red cherry, 1984, the year I was born. I carried the photo in my pocket for a month before he died, imagining myself in his spotlight. My mother moved softly around his house, dusting the wooden slats of drawn shades, lifting each prescription bottle from the nightstand to polish underneath it. I waited. I sat in the hall beside his bedroom, stared through the sliver of door at that embroidered image rising and falling upon his chest. A cherry tree, my mother had explained, just about to blossom, then fade. My mother, when I was growing up, being a single mother, often worked 2 or 3 jobs, but we were still reliant for much of my childhood on various forms of government welfare. So another important figure in my life at that time was the state. The first time I ate ambrosia was at a summer barbecue for welfare recipients where attendance was taken. I remember its texture of almost nothing, the acrid spit that settled on my tongue, no matter how many times I swallowed. I ate it because it was what they gave me. It left me hungrier than before. This next poem is named for my boyfriend, Ellie, who is here tonight. Eliezer. On the subway somewhere near Federal Center Southwest, I stare at a sheet of newspaper discarded on the gum-stuck floor. A headline reads something about the Gaza Strip, but at this distance, I can't see clearly the image underneath. It appears more or less like two soldiers grimacing through flecks of dirt or ash in the air, and I think of my Jewish boyfriend who spent the first half of his life in Israel and the next half cursing his own good name. In the Torah, it was Eliezer who walked the desert in search of a wife for Isaac. He found her drawing water from a well and brought her back to Canaan, where she was wed to his master and grew twin sons who from the womb would fight each other. I do not cross the aisle to read that news story. I spend the rest of my commute contemplating the scale of government pay grades and whether it will rain another day. Only for a moment at the threshold of sliding doors do I glance down and see more closely now that same image, realizing the shapes I thought were soldiers are in fact two boys no older than 12. Both their faces are spattered with somebody else's blood, and they are crying. All of a sudden, Eliezer, I understand. If only you had foreseen this future, where two sons seek the sole blessing of their blind father. If only, Eliezer, when you met her in the middle of the desert, and she offered you her water, you did not drink. And I'm going to end with some poems about the time I spent living in Bolivia. I first traveled there as an unsuspecting undergrad on study abroad and found myself quickly enamored with the place, the people, the land, and I have been continually drawn back to that place, both in life and in my art. Why, in the end, I'm not an anthropologist. If I were to tell you one story about Bolivia, it would be a boy holding in his arms a dog gone limp as steamed cabbage. The boy is 7, his straight black hair cut jagged across his forehead. The dog has been poisoned by his lighter-skinned neighbor. In a scene such as this, it is customary to expect tears, some external indication of being broken in half. But the boy is not crying. He is standing barefoot in the dirt under his family's clothesline, the hem of a thin white bedsheet grazing his hair. The only sounds are the bellow snap of that bedsheet in the wind, and the boy's mother scraping the bottom of a tin pot as she stirs that night's supper. River. It's not that I imagined making love to a river, to the 3 cold peaks of Illimani and the waters that flow from the city down to the valley where you were born. But I may have gotten carried away once or twice, looking out your bedroom window at that mountain. You first took me to your village in mid-December, and while we ran off behind the abandoned chapel, your mother beheaded her fattest hen in my honor, hung it by its feet over a tin pan in the courtyard. Before dinner, you held me quick in the cusp of your arm, swirled me through eddies of white feathers. Is this what snow is like, you asked? I did not love you so much as the rise and fall of your voice when you would say, mi vida. I like the thought of it, your life, the wool cloth your mother carried you in as a baby. Once, I wrapped your nephew in that cloth, tied him to my back the way Bolivian women do, and stood before the mirror, imagining he was mine. On Sunday, your mother brought me to church, dressed me up like a dream she had before you were born, in shining silver sandals and that low-slung blue dress she bought 25 years before. As the only guest, and an American, I sat in the front pew, so close I could feel the air brush against my bare thigh each time the priest swung his heavy, vested arm. That night I let you make love to me, hard against the dresser. I remember the moon was full against Illimani. Its snow caps reflected back the blue of an unbeating heart. And I thought nothing was ever so brazen, so beautiful, as that moon and that mountain repelling each other. I said no. I'm writing this on the pink wrapper of a Nacional toilet paper roll. It's been 18 hours now on the bus to Tarija, to be followed by 2 more in a hired jeep to a village with 1 dirt road, a cement schoolroom, and a church with a tiny courtyard, the town's only telephone at its center. When it rings, the priest answers. Children fetch whoever is asked for. It's been years since I've been back, but the route is the same, barely 2 axles across and clinging to a red canyon wall. Around corners, the bus, stacked with potato sacks, lurches over the ledge. And the canyon opens its great arms to expose a valley floor scattered with what I know, even from this distance, is not tumbleweed. There was a time when dying here would have been my destiny. The woman the next seat over has amber-colored eyes that look past me out the window at the canyon. Her left hand is gangrenous. She covers the shrunken apple of her fist in a pink cloth. I imagine a time when she was beautiful. Try to catch a tinny rhythm on the radio, but can't recognize the songs anymore. I have seen others like you, she says, still looking away, alone. On my last night in that village, we drank warm Singani mixed with milk, danced cuecas around the schoolroom, twirling handkerchiefs over our heads. Afterward, out on the stone stoop, still catching our breath, the only young man who'd not yet emigrated to Argentina asked me to marry him. To stand in the courtyard by the phone booth, marigolds in my hair, wearing the dress his mother sewed. As the landscape blurs past, I imagine myself over and over at the head of that dirt road, and everything else as I left it. The woman's amber eyes are closed. The pink cloth has slipped off in her. I wonder, in her dreams, does cool air sweep the skin? In Spanish, the name of that little town is Mercy.
Great pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce you to the poetry of Juliana Doherty this evening. Julie's poems are ones I've been admiring throughout the past year, praying that she would bring in a poem so I could hear her read in that incredible voice that she has. And so I was truly delighted when I finally had the opportunity to read her thesis and have the gorgeousness all collected for me. I realized after reading even just the first poem that these are poems I've been unknowingly pining after, poems I've been wanting to inhabit, to wear like a gown. I am so charmed by their spare elegance and the way they tell the story of the risk of trembling. How often short is the expanse between this trembling and solid ground. As I'm sure many of you know, Julie is a beautiful and talented musician, and her poems are so near to song that to read or hear them is to feel as though you yourself are singing from a place you don't remember existing. Their gait is trustworthy. They immediately anchor you into a certain depth of feeling and reverence. But in the same breath, they let you stumble and lose your footing for a moment and fall into them. That fall is towards the loveliest of graces. There's a vulnerability and an openness here that leaves one quietly changed. As she writes in one of my favorite poems, Abad, how could I be one thing so long and then suddenly not? What walked so softly through me? Julie has an amazing ability to tell a tale filled at once with emptiness and sound, the way light and darkness tell both sides of the same story. Thank you, Julie, for your resplendent body of work and for being such a wise and perceptive reader of our work.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to try to speak as loudly as possible so that I hope everyone can hear me. Molly gave away the ending to my second poem, which is great, but you guys are going to know what's coming, which is kind of exciting. I don't have a lot to say before I start, so I think I'm just going to read through them as quickly as possible because I chose a lot, and give short introductions as needed. But most of them should stand on their own. Okay, I'm going to start with one that's from a series, the only series, an incomplete series, the only one that I've ever attempted, that Cecilia Lompart gave me the idea for, and it is the months of the year. Right now I only have 4 of them. They're not really meant to go in sequence, so I've scattered them throughout the reading, but yeah, you will hear other months. Yeah. March. Now you will have to know you are alone. Everything else sleeps, the birds still gone, the insects burrowed underground. All of it quiet, but the wind making the sound of giving out, stretched to the reach of its tether. Even the voice wants to curl back into the throat, the voice stripped down to flicker, about to go out. How much longer now? No common word for the sky's blank stare, or the way the air's white box shakes empty, days dragged out by the hair. Obad. They must have been so gentle, the deer, for me to sleep like that through the garden's ruin, sometime in the night, maybe, or just after dawn, the softness of them bearing the teeth and hooves, the timidness hiding the improbable hunger. So able to tear and crush, so able to wreck, each neat row yielding under unimagined heaviness. And now, once more, it's morning, light still weightless, sky flat blue, and the moon, the night's diminished revenant, abandoned there, hanging over it all like a question never answered. How I could be one thing so long, and then suddenly not, what walked so softly through me. Elegy. Not winter like a door blown shut, before that, before snow's erasure and the zero knell of wind. Not cold, the infant purity, the skin stung clean, no, still with a sweetness lingering, the ferment of it, like the wax wings feeding while the berries blackened, like the willow beauties lifting spectral from the yard's dark yielding. There, that arch, the trellised vine, love's death, the safe tent brittling. This poem, I guess I don't really need to say anything about it, but I will say that it's sort of existed in lots of different forms, and been about very many different things over the course of its history, and I think what it is turning into is a sort of ars poetica, so take that how you will. October. Wild flare, the white heat burning out, burning on nothing. My body has no body now, grows feral, flings itself outside its boundaries, like a yard left too long unattended, like a yard on fire. All night I smoke and listen to the wind's insistent rasp in the branches outside, noise like matches spitting into light. Is this what it takes to impress you? Nothing can subsist on limit only, I know, but I'm nearer brilliance, disappearing than I've ever been, and fearless now, all skin and tinder, furious and crazed to begging, feeding blazes, even if my voice is ash before I ever sing. November. For more than once before and still, forgive me. For my animal eye, all need and widening need, so willing to seize whatever little warmth might offer first that it be pressed against, however coarse, however foolish, and forever hunting blindly something to burrow into, under, heeding mostly fear and ease, naive and knowing no other way to winter over. And for if I ever ask too great a labor of you, lover, the self devours itself, then hungers for another. So I was just thinking about how I should be looking up more while I'm reading, and the sun, like, directly into this tiny little crack between the tree and building is where it is now, so now I can't.
It's in your face very pretty.
It is in my face. Oh, and I just looked at it and now I can't see the page. Oh no. Okay. The perils of after reading. All right. Intercession for Krista. That your tongue undumbed, and might it once permit you, yes, this once miraculous. For wept you felt these evenings whiling you away, felt whittled slim and less, and littled, cried how hour by hour had turned your pockets out, and loosed the change, and lost it. Felt yourself a slip of once, and pale, diminished this, what mercy, yes, so that your hands unwrung, and might they thus obey the wiles you willed them to and wanted, what benevolence of yes, please, yes, this littlest for you, this only just, for once, this smallest currency of happiness. This is probably the oldest poem that has stayed in my thesis collection, and I actually read it. We had to have an MFA reading series, and I read last week. And I said I wasn't going to read anything twice, but I read this one on Thursday, and I'm going to read it again. So some of you will recognize it. The Nightmare. There was a swollen lake with a face on the surface. It was the new moon. There was no moon. It was my face. I waded out to it. I fished it out of the water. It was a silver mirror. It was the shimmering pool I cupped in my palms. There was a tree floating there with a sliver of moon in its branches. There was no moon. It was a knife. I wiped the blade clean with my fingers. It was a fish thrashing in my hands. I let it slip back under the black water. The scales glistened like blood on my skin. There was a silver river I walked on like a saint. It was a field covered in frost. It was almost morning. The red sun rose like a moored boat in the river tide. There was no boat. Somebody'd cut the rope. It was a red horse galloping over the hill. Somebody'd cut the horse loose from the tethering post. It was almost morning. It was still night. There was a line of stars like breadcrumbs leading into the dark. It was a barbed wire fence. There was a lake full of lights, glittering like fish. It was terribly dark. Somebody'd shattered the moon. Somebody'd scattered the glass everywhere. There was a chaos of stars. The lights all flashed like teeth in the night's mean streets. There was no path to follow. This one, I guess, needs a little bit of introduction, too. The poem is titled Miss, M-I-S, which is a prefix. And then this is the only poem that I've ever written in sections, but each section is the end of the prefix. So there's speak, hear, and step. I will announce them. Miss. 1. Speak. Air seeks air, and the tongue's the worm-blind warder. Dumb slog bumbling, while what you buried blunders brightward. 2. Hear. Dear deaf ear, make do, hums the word, or is it mum or mute, all moot. From hunger, alchemy, the eye's apprentice, dropping eaves, take 2 or 3 and slower now, fool wool to goal. 3. Step. Left and left, behind, bereft, through the gingerbread woods where the gloom drools wolves, you stagger, laces tangling. Just when things were looking bright, you say, and stumble. Think of your whole life's fable crumbling. It might. Just a couple more. 3 more. Confession for Jay. Pet hypothetical, my dear elusive reverie. What reckless appetite invoked these shimmering unlikelihoods, while sleight of habit flourished handkerchiefs to conjure evidence like rabbit after rabbit. I was patient long enough and bored past tears of wanting nothing within reason. Was a body to a fault persuadable? O timid, injured one, you ought at least to know it never mattered whose the stammered flatteries, the quivering initiative, what facts I magicked into vanishing a moment only. No, I did not choose another either. Father, bless us, we are lonely.
January. First burial, beneath whose certainty the known geographies abstract and falsify, erasure by erasure, while inside me some anonymous ennui works through its baffling mathematics, all the ordinary joys and agonies made equal now, and vanished into something vast and breathless and unbearable. Even the wind won't fight away into this interrupted air, the flurries rendering the distances incomprehensible and then irrelevant. Even the animals have been a long time practicing for death, but white is the color of mercy, I tell myself, and the cold, medicinal and bright sinks in again, its long syringe to empty or annul me.
The last one.
Benediction. Let the bees tend, let the hollow honey over, a wound mended, a hole hymned full. Let sustenance be mustered up, where one from one's becomes, where self to self to self pressed close makes yes, makes blessed, a warmth amassed, a winter lasted. Let the sweetness be kept fast, until the brood unlids the ready cells, until the chambers gift their hiddens.
I am honored tonight to be introducing a man whose name I lived in fear of mispronouncing for an entire semester. But I shouldn't have worried so much. Guyan soon revealed himself to be incredibly kind and unintimidating, willing to share everything except the Chick-fil-A he brought to workshop. I easily fell in love with Guyan's poetry, his attention to sound and space, his dedication to inhabiting character and camera lens is enviable. I admire Guyan's poetry for always striving to inhabit multiple levels of meaning. Like a movie that, upon rewatching, yields up some new, tiny thing we somehow managed to miss on all previous viewings, Guyan's poems contain an endless reservoir of small surprises. In one of my favorite poems, Oranges, a farmer's field is miraculously graced with citrus fruit, even though the man insists at the end of the poem that he planted potatoes. For me, this sentiment encapsulates Guyan's poetic process. His words plant a small seed, a story of having to kill a mouse, a monologue from the point of view of a tongue, that grow into a fruit none of us, not even the poet himself, expected. In his poetry, one finds both delight and sustenance. But I would be remiss if I spoke only of Guyan's poems and not of his character. Here, a word we rarely use, joyful, is the only word that will do. Appreciator of tortilla chips and musical dissonance, ringer of bells and maker of beer, Guyan loves well and widely. Perhaps the most telling detail is that babies will invariably prefer to be held by Guyan than by any other person in the room, sometimes including their own mothers. Some of us write poetry because we hope against all apparent proof that somehow, by inhabiting characters, by paying close attention to the world around us, by, in other words, being a poet, that we will also become more empathetic and attentive human beings. I am very grateful to poets like Guyan, who let me retain my belief that to write wonderful poetry, one must also be a wonderful person.
Wow.
Yes.
Thanks, Celeste. Austin, do you want to come on up and help me? This is another wonderful person here, Austin Smith. You'll get to hear more from him later. He's going to help me read this first poem. It's got two voices in it. It's kind of dedicated to the film Blow Up. Can everyone hear me? Has anyone seen Blow Up? It's terrific. I hope you don't need to see it, but if you get lost, just go home and watch the movie, and it'll all make sense to you, and it'll be great. So we're going to kind of pass this back. He's going to read that part. So he's going to read kind of my voice, and I'm going to read the voice of the director, Michelangelo Antonioni. So I'll start. My camera has your camera in it, yours that never leaves your neck, light yoke, sucking the world into your dark room, combing for a punchline somewhere in the middle of the best joke God ever told. I'll give you a hint. It starts with the breath.
My grandfather's breath, asthmatic murmuring. In this photograph, he has just deeply drawn it, mouth rounded, 3 of the cake's candles still lit, their reflection glowing dizzy in his spectacles. My 8-year-old cousin has blown out the rest. They have the same name, and their mouths are frozen in the same rounded shape.
I can see you, you should know, even though the lovers can't. Language is a mold, image a kiln, or is it the other way around? Either way, it is I who led your eye to the antique store, closed it so you would photograph the outside instead. This is when I first took you too neatly, impossibly tipped my hand, drawing you into the park through a fine frame of trees too fragile for anything like reality. All the while you were fumbling to capture the pigeons, I already had them, and when at last they had flown out of reach of your lens, I had them still. As for the couple dancing in that deep field, they were my design entirely. Also the fence you hid behind to shoot them from, looking so casual I had to center you behind the one post to prove my point. All of it I made happen with a word.
Who put the light behind his head, leaning over the cake to help my grandfather blow, leaning in so that he swallows the frame, the lamplight diffusing around him, saint of the breath, Madonna of the line, 8 years old, bright future, youngest star in Abraham's allotted firmament, who just yesterday learned how to nymph for trout, the names of the flies, and what warm beer tastes like.
I put the man in the trees. I put the gun in his hand, pulled the trigger when you weren't looking, gave you the body so small in the background, so when you enlarged it, he would be a gesture of a thing at best, an unquietness in your stomach, a riddle you're sure you could solve if you could only hear it again.
Who tilted the blinds up? Who put the pen in his breast pocket? Who taught him to breathe so round?
Something fantastic has happened.
Who froze his harrowed breathing in mid-shake?
By the way, I never got your name.
Who is it that fashions wonder from such troubled parts?
No matter. What I want is the picture.
Something fantastic has happened.
Something fantastic has happened.
I said I want to get your picture, take you home, blow you up, till you're nothing but dots, hang your particles on my wall and praise them.
Thanks. That's Austin Smith. So that comes from a series of film poems that I did. I'm really kind of taken with how montage works in poetry as a device. So I had a series of montages, and that's one of them. Go see that film if you haven't. Maybe one of the main points of that poem is to make sure people see that film. I think it used to be a standard, but now I ask people. It's a good one. The rest of these are going to be a series of poems I started writing about horse racing. They're inspired by Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology and David Lynch's Twin Peaks, so sort of a cross between that and sort of making fun of Seabiscuit a little bit, just the kind of horse worship thing. There's actually a horse that is in some way deific in these poems, so when I'm talking about that, I mean it. It's kind of, we're going there. So this first one is called Condense, which in an old Bedouin myth, Allah says to the wind, he sees the southern wind, and he says, I want to make a creature of you, condense, and the wind condenses and becomes a horse. So of course what Allah did was write the first poem. It speaks into being this thing, this creature out of breath. So that's what this is. Condense. Red dust saddled on southern gust, be poured out, spilt generously, become the stout bellows heaving and the dead earth swallowed up in a ridge of forelock, nape from nape. Let riches be sown into the back, victory sown. Let a treasure be stowed in the loins. No, sow nothing, add nothing, for nothing may be added to the wind. Better to give up the wings, inhabit form, translate, become a creature of the very breath, and in wild winglessness collapse from ether into galloping. So these poems are all kind of centered around a horse track that's sort of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This is sort of an overture to give you an idea of the characters. Sinaloa Downs Overture. The jockeys are faceless, and the bookies lonesome. Evening's damp collects in hoof prints across the dirt lanes and into the pond, the centerpiece of the revelry. Dragonflies congregate in the wet places, pick the mosquitoes and the damselflies from the dung patches. As a boy, I rode my bike out here to catch the devil's darning needles. Their wings beat so fast, I'd heard they'd cut your ears, heard them called Satan's horses, heard they were friendly with snakes. I went anyway. Wind coming over the groves sends orange through the air, mixing with peanuts and fertilizer. The big race is tomorrow. Grading rollers wait in the shed to press the lanes at dawn. In their motel rooms, the jockeys iron their silks. Tillman, the announcer, is memorizing the names of the horses. Admiral Magnolia, the bay from Carthage. Gypsy, who everyone knows breaks late. Paycheck, the chestnut with the teenage rider. And the one they call Midnight Lightning. Praise be, many things have been said about him. The jockeys dream of wreaths that don't wither, the mares of flies that don't bite, don't burrow in the throat latch. The geldings dream of knives in their sheaths, wake holy and with a start. The painter moonlights over sketches in her library. She learns the names of the muscles and bones. Orbit, atlas, repeats them to herself as she falls asleep. Cannon, pedal. Then she dreams the words, and when she wakes they are gone from her, replaced by some knowledge that is the stretching of tendons, the turning of joints, mud tamped in the crease of a shoe. Tomorrow at the race she will place bets that her brush may know the anxiety of stakes. In my dream, I grow 2 sets of wings and skate over the unfrozen pond. In the bookie's dream, he falls repeatedly in a fire and is repeatedly not burned. Tillman's is the nightmare of 1,000 oranges shaking themselves loose, circling the track like a drain in the fog of dawn. Nobody knows what the midnight lightning dreams of. So this is for Tillman's kind of monologue. All of these are kind of dramatic thought monologues, and this is him wrestling with his tongue. Tillman addresses his tongue. Blind bastard shapeshifter, you can lick the bowl, you can clean a mustache, you can taste a lady anywhere, you sweat when you're lonely, you can sing any old song by heart, but get you in a room with the alphabet and the engine won't turn over, the record skips, you got 2 left feet, tongue, you've been taking a drink when I wasn't looking, I got a job, I gotta sing the races tomorrow, but you're gonna need your nap, you're gonna throw a fit, I know it, take pity. Consider my parents, my brother. He swallowed half the teeth he ever lost. He would leave them hanging by a string until they came out in a sandwich, an apple, his sleep. At night he'd leave IOUs and apologies under his pillow. Damned if there weren't quarters there the next morning every time. And this is the Sultan from the perspective of his son. The Sultan. The Sultan drives a Buick Special. The seats are blue leather. When a police pulls him over, the Sultan gets out of the car and meets him halfway, shakes his hand. I don't think they know what to think. The Sultan is my daddy. The Sultan is 10 feet tall. The Sultan trades futures. I don't know how that works, but it makes the hair on my neck stand up thinking about it. The Sultan's brow is thick. He has dominion over all he sees. When he crosses the threshold of his house, a woman is there to greet him, takes his coat, offers him her cheek. He grows a beard sometimes just to shave it, so she will say she forgot how good he looks. Then the Sultan kisses her with his eyes open, asks for his dinner, puts his elbows on the table. The Sultan eats red meat. Would you believe it? Well, the doctor said he isn't supposed to, but I'll let you remind him. Go on. When the Sultan is angry, he slams things. One time I saw him slam a milk jug on the table over and over. Crap, 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 he yelled as he did it. The milk hitting the ceiling fan, spinning out onto the walls. There are still stains. Who remembers what I'd done? But it's not all bad. I bet you didn't know the Sultan also rides. He's fond of that Admiral Magnolia. He bought him at an auction for like $1 million. Said it was a steal. I've seen the Sultan taking him on jumps some mornings, though I'm not supposed to tell. Dark spot quick dartings in the fog, like a floater in the eye sometimes. The Sultan in history is, you can go back and trace the lineage of all thoroughbred horses, which is really fun, and the names are all amazing. And there's this horse named the Sultan who's more famous for the horses that he sired than anything he ever did in his own life. So that's where that title comes from. This is Oranges. It's for my grandfather. A mystery even to me how they grow here, our heavy winters and our clay. Some scientists have come to my groves to test the soil, the air, the water. Praise be to the midnight lightning. I tried to tell them I've seen him combing my rows in the pre-dawn, depositing his many blessings. May God bless him back. That first night I saw him, the wind was wheezing in cold around the windowsill. I got up, got a towel to seal it. There he was, black as, well, you know. I called the police. They called Crowley, had him check on the stables. He swore the horses were safe, all accounted for. But I know it was midnight lightning. I saw it, that spectral white streak of mane. A few weeks later, I found the first saplings. The scientists can't explain it. They come back every year and find the crop larger. My miracle children, reborn by the thousands each spring. They say you will reap what you sow. Oranges, I told the scientists, even though I planted potatoes. This one is called Gauze. It's called Gauze. And it's for the Sultan and Tillman. Gauze. Our father ran the stables at the Downs for years. He'd let me and my brother run around the track on stick horses. He was a quiet man, a careful man. When he spanked us, he never used his hand. There was always an instrument, a ping-pong paddle, a length of board. Once all he could find was the plastic lid of a picnic cooler. My brother was 8, bent over the bedside shaking, waiting for the strike to come. He tried to slump down, turn around, slither out of the way, with our father already in mid-swing. He got 6 stitches in his lip and the last of his baby teeth knocked out. It was the only time I saw our father cry. My brother's face was swollen for a week. My mother wrapped his head in gauze to hold the ice packs to his cheeks. I wanted the attention. I asked her to wrap mine. Why, she asked. My eyes are broken, I said. She laughed, then did it anyway. Covered my eyes in gauze, and my hair, a great turban of gauze, stood back and laughed and called me Sultan. It was later that year we heard Billy Graham say on the radio that 9- and 10-year-old boys would die in Vietnam. I was 12, so I didn't worry. But my brother was 9 by then. He looked at my father, who said nothing. A careful man, a man of few words. My brother didn't sleep for weeks. He formed ulcers. The war ended 6 months later, but it was too late. He knew he was going to die. He started having trouble finishing sentences. Our father made him practice on the loudspeaker at the track so he could hear his voice coming back to him from the stands. It hasn't yet, though he keeps trying. Just an echo. Can you hear it? He asks me. Hear what, I say. What is it, Tillman? Death's echo all night long. I have no concept of time whatsoever, so I don't know how we're doing, but I'm going to read 2 more. Get out of here. Okay. So this one is back to the film poems. This is called Machina de Presa, which is for Jürgen Leff, the director of the short film called The Perfect Human. Another great one. Go check it out. It rules. So there are several lines from that film, and one line from an old hymn. In him there is no darkness at all. The night and the day are both alike. So those are kind of, when you hear those things, that's where they're coming from. And I'm preoccupied with how a camera works. I think it's great. So Machina de Presa is the Italian term for a film camera. It literally translates to the machine that takes. A room with no boundaries and with nothing. So darkness. Then the shutter opens and light ever trying to insert itself, pushes through to fill that small chamber, scattering for a half moment the perennially abdicating dark. It is said that darkness is ruled by light, that in God there is no darkness at all. The night and the day are both alike, a light. Inside the body is dark, and light does not pass through it. I infer I am not God. The machine that takes, the machine that praises. Darkness returns with the shutter, pressing the light flat on celluloid like violets shut up in a book. Praise God, the dark chamber of man. Again, 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 the mechanical eye blinks the world into its litany of little brown squares. Today, too, I experienced something, praises, that I hope to understand in a few days takes. The universe, they say, is expanding, the matter spreading out, the dark of space stretching to hold it. A miracle, how all the vastness the eye surveys, it can fit inside itself. A room with no boundaries, so small it could slip between the fingers, roll away unnoticed, a universe inside. This is Tillman's tongue, talking back to him. And thank you guys. This has been great. Really fun. So this is Tillman's tongue, kind of retorting basically, and it's my attempt at a rap battle, I guess. We'll see how it goes. Dumb, drunk, pot still, strung, skeins, numb, skunk. I'll teach you to drown me with that homemade junk. I'll teach you to pack me with that wintergreen chaw. Chainsaw, cut, gum, scum, skin, chin, claw. Like 1,000 knives licking my underside raw. Like a troupe of tap dancers with razor blade heels. Like a volley of arrows, fire on. Your cooking is dog shit, like licking the floor. No flush, skip brush, kiss whore, cold sore, grammar piss poor, breath like bear mace. Wait until tomorrow when you're calling that race. Pace, slip, clip, lob, lip, wall, brat, brace, round, brand, hand, brown, bay, pond, bound, tan. I'm warning you, Tillman, don't mess with me, man.
Kafka wrote, "A book should serve as the axe for the frozen sea within us." And in a world of increasing cynicism and seemingly endless violence against the human spirit, if not always the human body, we are in desperate need of literature that can crack that ice. But the poetry of Marielle Prince is not an axe. No, it is nothing so brutal and crude. Her voice in her verse is subtler, an ice pick perhaps, an instrument that can be hidden in the hand, striking the ice quickly and disappearing again up the sleeve. Marielle possesses a particular gift for sound, and her poems come replete with assonance, alliteration, rhyme, and an overall careful negotiation of her words' sonic elements. Listening to a poem progress like a game in the ear, you are pulled into Marielle's thematic world without realizing it. Merely savoring the sound and the play of the words, you suddenly find yourself face to face with some truth. Gritty, unpleasant perhaps, maybe not what you thought you signed up for. You get lost in the glorious sound of everything. But Marielle manages the tone of her poems so well that such shifts are never jarring. She manages to mix wit and humor with sharp philosophical observations and moments of lyric beauty in order to create poems of admirable force. I should be telling you that Marielle is a native of Durham, North Carolina, or that she received her BA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But what I want to tell you is that pieces of her poems get into my bloodstream, or that her titles are nearly poems in and of themselves. Titles like Drowning Song, Lullaby with Afterthoughts, Self-Portrait as Magpie, Blessed Are the Cheesemakers, or a personal favorite, Christ is coming, resistance is futile. What I should ultimately tell you then is to prepare yourselves. These are poems of uncommon scope and skill. They are not an axe for the frozen sea within us, no, perhaps not even an ice pick. Rather than something so violent, these poems are quiet but undeniable force. They are the new spring, the sun melting the ice until it dissolves without a whimper. Please join me in welcoming Marielle Prince.
We didn't plan our outfits, but yeah. Thank you, Jocelyn. That was really lovely. And thank you all for waiting for me as I was the last to arrive. We were trapped on the other side of the looking glass. I'm going to start with a poem that I read, that I wrote a year ago yesterday, on the first day of May. And this is my contribution to Julie's month poems. It's called May. May the fertile things sow slowly, and the winds die down. May the bird that was blown here stay. May this not be the beginning of anything. May the middle of the day show its fat belly and the steeple cast no shadow. May these words already be out of my mouth and my hands be steady where the groan meets the ground. The roots of your someday leaving, may they yield. And next, I'm going to do the longest poem I've ever attempted to do at a reading. So I hope that you all have patience for it. You can sort of mark its progress because it's a crown of sonnets. And so there are 7 half sonnets, so it's not quite as long as a crown of sonnets. But the last line of each sonnet is the first line of the next, so you'll sort of hear the shifting. And I'm reading it because I have a lovely number of my family members here, and I wrote this poem for my grandfather who passed away last year. And so they have not heard it yet, and I wanted them to. So. Words over the Body. For Edward Rocap, August 1922 to August 2011. I have come these 100 miles to sit in silence with people who knew him. Some would go as far to see a certain rare sparrow along a trail. Sometimes it is a treasure just to be seen. Yes, today I am a bright little sundog, secret garden, face behind the fan. Dear view, I've nothing to say too. I had nothing to say to the old man with no nouns. His last known pecan pie fell through his lips like a pea from an unturned spoon. The attendant who asked, was he a sweet daddy, held a bent straw to the slack mouth for punctuation. Not exactly, my mother's frank reply she quickly took back, scanning his face for hurt. Scanning my face for hurt, I ask, whose knows? The answer is all I care to know of the hereafter. My grandfather went in one over-solid piece out the side door of the church, carried by 6 pallbearers, laid down all at once, while my cousins hummed alive their throats. This man's decomposition in our bodies, our children's. In my body, my children's half-selves are always dying. I don't feel these days like such a granddaughter, believing in short stories while others cry for next chapters. Only this morning, a teaspoon's worth of my regular bleeding came out purple as a plum. No hidden bit of me eager to change. Eager to change, we watch each other for weight and color. Even the dead whiten between viewing days. Strange scowl on her husband's face, my grandmother says, his hands are the only part that looks natural. But I think they are where the stillness hits hardest. I feel sick for contradicting her. The feeling is familiar. The feeling is familiar, trying to remember you self-possessed. I go back 20 years, find peripheral details, a poster of Madame Butterfly, Lady Justice's scales embossed on your stationery, a green, silk-threaded couch always cool to the touch. Then the memory of you inflates gently under me, my girlhood on your belly. My girlhood has a bell running up from her grave. I wouldn't save her but Pop-Up, I could tell when we buried you she was ringing. You told me everything is a mystery. It's true, if only because I don't know of any other way to carry you. Pausing where these unknowns fit, I have come for this. All right, grand experiment in not crying. We have succeeded. Maybe the front row hasn't. Okay, moving on to things that are much less sincere, of which I have many. This poem is also an experiment in a way, in that it's sort of, the poem is a little bit of a hologram, and then it contains sort of two different images, and I'm afraid that reading it aloud might be a little bit like trying to look at both images in the middle and not seeing either, but I'm going to try, and maybe you'll get tastes of the picture on either side. That were it, or the air. We need to clear the table. Your breath, you hold the table. Your cheek, I slap the table to make a point. The music, neighbors hear the table through the wall. A mark, I leave the table. Your voice, you raise the table, drop it roughly. I beg, forgive me the table. Knocking, neighbors, the table. Away, we pretend to be the table. In bed, we lie the table apart. Sex, at least we still have the table, but for now, sleep. The table is resetting. And this is a piece of light verse, which is dark light verse, so I think it's allowed. It's called Tell Me You Love Me. If the word is a weed in the plot of your mouth, here I am with my trowel, I will dig the word out, and the root in your gut will tug loose and come up, and you will be freed if the word is a weed. If the word is a weight on the boat of your head, I will jettison freight till displacement is dead, and the tonnage I've tossed may come at a cost, but you will be safe if the word is a weight. If the word is a ward in the house of your jaw, I am here to evict it for breaking your laws. And when I move in, I'll steam clean your skin, and you'll be adored if the word is a ward. If the word is a wart on the hide of your face, I am here with my ice, I am here with my blade, and the blood I will spill will all be for nil. It comes back for more. The word is a war. And continuing in sort of what Jocelyn mentioned is the games of my poem. This next poem started as a sort of strike-through poem in that there's one poem contained in another, and that containment is achieved by minusing words. But I've separated them into two sections. So first you'll get the paired section, and then you'll get the full section that it was paired from. If that makes any sense. And it's called The Alternative. 1. Toss him a smile. Like a ribbon, he was a pretty thing I wanted. I took care to do no damage, once assured of the good in his heart. Afraid of the body's possibilities, I let one hand hold his, one graze the back of his neck. I wanted the best present, the small box. I took his name. Now I'm an honest woman. 2. Toss him away with a smile. Like a ribbon, he marked a pretty thing I wanted. I took care, shaking him to do no damage, once assured of the goods I got in his heart. Afraid of missing the body's possibilities, I let one hand guide him to my hold. His one grazing thrust fell the back of his neck. I wanted the best present. I had the small box. I took from him my one loss and forgot his name. Now, wouldn't you say I am an honest woman? This next poem is new, and it actually didn't even make it into the thesis. But I've been working on it for about a year and a half. Lisa Fink had a reading group 2 winters ago at her house, and we read Steve Healy's 10 Mississippi. And we did like a free writing one day.
And I chose a couple of lines from the title poem, 10 Mississippi, to do a free write on, and I got like a page and a half of stuff, and it's now finally a villanelle after all that condensing. So the lines that I was working with are these two from his poem. If you were a geologist, you might have such a party. You might invite many Mississippi rivers. And it's worth remembering, however, that the river is not a person. This doesn't have a title yet. The river is not a person. If you ask the river to a party, the river will not stand at the snack table and chat. The river will come through the front door, take up the snack table, and carry it out the back door. Once the river is gone, the rest of the guests will scatter. The river is not a person. If you ask, the river won't report that you go home with a man and sleep over, and in the morning need a ride and have to ask the river so that you come through the front door of the next party in the arms of the river. Your friends won't hear you over it. How you flatter the river, which isn't a person, even if you ask. The river will talk all night and leave you with another man from the other side of the river who knows that the river sometimes comes through the front door. This last man's eyes will follow you down the course of the river, but he won't so much as throw you a raft. The river is not a person, but if you ask it, the river will at least come through the front door. Thanks. And then back into Sincere Land, briefly. And finally, I just have two more. So this is called Functions of Absence. Function, noun. In math, the idea that one quantity completely determines another quantity, also called mapping. 1. Quantity 1. Known as distance, this interval can be calculated as the bird flies, as the moon twists. As the globe spins, one observed point may appear to pursue another. 2. Approximation. This much is the size of my wingspan, is how much I can miss you. Missing equal to the stretch, each end touching nothing. 3. Equals. We used to be weight within the same breath of sun. Before words, I counted up your figure on my fingers. Now a whole day blazes over you before I receive its first cold report. Now this dividing line we call equator erases all my work. 4. Quantity 2. The relative fondness of the heart is a variable said to be multiplied by absence. Other half, please forgive me for doing that math with a fraction. 5. Graph. This world is not a room I can recognize your voice from the other side of. Sometimes there is a continent draped in a white sheet or a vowel that creaks a floorboard under my skin. It's not enough to follow, though I start, and looking down at the arc of that misstep, chart it. And I'll finish with the first poem in my thesis. Notes from the Horizon. If I could say it in one line, I would. Send this simple letter home. I am widening. But it isn't really me, is it, they want to hear about, but the land, how far it goes. Hardly qualified I feel to speak of anything but water, I turn anyway, unquestioning as a compass, ever pointing myself away from where I've come. And it isn't the end of the world I see, is it? And neither can I see the world turning back, the route to the underbelly I'll soon be taking, but the sea and the sky going along ahead, the edge of a level plain that continues flat off the back of the globe I know we're glued to, and worse, the horizon, only an illusion, the sky, an asymptote to the earth's curve, the heavens coming down, taking forever.
Thanks for everyone reading. It was like, I almost cried several times. So I'm here to introduce Austin Smith, who is also one of my very best friends in the whole world.
The day after Austin and I met, we sat across from each other, cross-legged on the floor of his room and talked for 4 hours without stopping. I had just moved to Charlottesville all the way from Washington State. I thought, it's okay that I'm here now. If I have this boy in my life, then I can be happy. Our favorite thing to do together now is to go for long drives and find abandoned barns, houses, shacks, cabins, summer camps, farm equipment, hotels, and restaurants. We just drive with no direction, drive until we find exactly what we didn't know we were looking for. Austin and I go to church together every Sunday, and I put my hand in the crook of his arm like we are married, and we believe that the other churchgoers gossip about us after we leave. We slept in Zuccotti Park together with Occupy Wall Street under one tarp, on fire with a delirious hope that we found immediately in one another. We help each other continue to unwind the mystery of our own lives and our own spiritual, ecstatic dedication to the beautiful. He helps me continue to access the delirious wonder of life. Like Oscar Wilde wrote, he lives the poetry that he cannot write, the others write the poetry they dare not realize. Austin is leaving Charlottesville this month, moving across the country to Stanford to face the terrifying fact that sometimes our dreams do come true. I admire his constant questioning of his successes, that he continues to find his true joy in a group of people we see drinking beer in a parking lot around a slick black motorcycle, or in the man that walks up and down the downtown mall singing gospel songs unabashedly with his palms held up. He lives for the small moments of bright, undeniable life, a truth that is frustratingly and necessarily wordless. Really, it can only be expressed by grabbing the shoulders of the other and shaking while staring wide-eyed and wide-jawed into each other's eyes. He sees that electric undercurrent of real life, the only thing we need to translate into words, the thing that we can barely translate into words, but that he does somehow, with grace and utmost sensitivity and honor. I remember when Austin came to watch the eviction of Occupy Charlottesville, and he told me the next day that of all the things that had happened that night, what he remembered most was the long yawn of one of the police officers, how in that motion he saw the cop's entire boyhood and could not help but love him. This is what Austin's writing is like that single motion, like watching an old man eating dinner alone, like watching a woman concentrating on her deep prayer during Mass, like the twists of string around all her fingers. I can see his boyhood in every moment, and I can feel it in his words, really feel it, and it stays there, stays here in my very, very heart. So, Austin Smith.
Thank you, Chelsea. Okay, thank you all for being here on this beautiful night. The first poem I'm going to read will either inspire you to ride the Greyhound across America or to do the exact opposite of that. It's called On a Greyhound Bus in America. There were only a handful of us left by the time we reached Des Moines. The guy who kicked my seat in anger all night from Sacramento to Reno got kicked off in Reno in a dark lot outside a maximum security prison. The driver yelling after him, "You got more business being in there, mister, than being on my bus," waking the woman with Tourette's, who screamed and swore for what was left of the night, claiming the man to her right was masturbating. Until a prissy, middle-aged lady leaned forward and said, "Will you please be quiet?" And the whole bus shook with laughter. By Iowa, the old woman sitting next to me, who'd had her luggage misplaced in a transfer in Omaha, had had enough. She whispered to me, "Young man, I tell you, I don't like this bus driver. I don't think he even likes himself." An hour later, she announced to the entire bus, "When I get home, I'm gonna put a sign up in the yard says done for the duration." The driver yelled, "I've had enough of that racket back there." He thought the woman with Tourette's was still acting up. She'd gotten off in silent awe in Omaha. So I don't know where that leaves you with the Greyhound experience, but I'm never doing it again. So this poem is for my brother Ryan, who's sitting right here. It's called Memoir of My Imaginary Sister. It sounded good when I was sitting there ready. Memoir of my imaginary sister. Growing up in a world of men, she was tougher than all of us combined. She never brushed her hair. Some evenings, our mother would come downstairs with her brush, begging to brush it for her her hair was beautiful, long and golden. When she was younger, our father called her Rapunzel, but she grew to despise the nickname. Most nights she'd say no, and watching my mother climb back up those stairs with that brush that had been her mother's and her mother's mother's was the saddest thing. My sister loved horses more than people, spoke of Montana as if it were the only place where there were horses. She said in Montana, after you die, you become a horse. That was your heaven. We all just smiled, like when a boy says he wants to be an astronaut. But she meant it when she said she was moving there. The night before she left, she came downstairs and let our mother brush her hair one last time. Just like Rapunzel, our father said under his breath, a mischievous look in his eye. She allowed it. That night, she and I stayed up long after everyone had gone to bed, listening to the radio. In the morning, she was gone before anyone could say goodbye. My parents went out west once to see her, but came back shaking their heads. She'd met a man who called himself a cowboy and lived with him on what he called a ranch, where they kept what he called 2 horses. She worked waiting tables at a diner in town, and he claimed, worked cattle. To this day, I haven't heard from her, but I know I had a sister once, because I found my mother's brush in a drawer last winter, and saw matted there, hair the color of gold or of straw ready to bale. Okay. This poem is for all my friends in Charlottesville, particularly for Lee Johnson. I don't think he's here. But more generally, it's for Dirty Nellies, which is a tavern, not a person. And there may be a Dirty Nelly out there. And a bartender named Skip, and a man named Gavin. And it's really dedicated to all my friends, and I'm very sad to be leaving town and to be leaving all of them. So it's particularly dedicated to Lee, and it's called The Fawn. A friend found a wounded fawn on the road back of where he lives. Unleashed, his Jack Russell Terrier lit into it, its broken forelegs folding wrong in the loose gravel. It cried out, he said, in a human voice. His girlfriend dragged the dog away, leaving Lee alone with the fawn. It couldn't stand, but in its eyes, he said, he saw the peace of all pardoned things. He was so beautiful, Austin. His eyelashes were this long. My friend has big hands, he plays bass, and he spread his thumb and finger wide apart as he could. I nodded and said, I could just see them. We shook our heads, laughed at beauty so beyond us, and drank to it. I wanted that to be the end of the story, Lee sitting there in the road, holding the breathing fawn in his lap, but it was too quiet in that bar not to tell how it ended. I couldn't shoot him, he said. He was too beautiful to shoot. So what I did was, I picked him up and carried him down to the pond. And here I saw Lee carrying the fawn through the trees, like my father used to carry calves born the night before, down out of the fields. And then, he said, we walked into the water. Okay. So this next poem is a, my family who are here, they always joke with me that I kind of mythologize things, that things didn't really happen the way that I remember them, but I have this memory of this homeless man named Les who showed up on our dairy farm in Illinois one night and needed a place to kind of stay. He probably just needed a place to park his car, but I've turned him into this whole apostle, this whole thing in my mind. So this may not be completely accurate, but this poem is for Les. It's called Poem for Les, Homeless. You were somehow yourself and the autumn, in your black coat smelling of ash and Salvation Army stores, standing broken in our door, begging my father to let you park your car in the barnyard, because your mother was dying in Freeport Memorial Hospital. You were downright senescent, standing there like a remorseful arsonist, singed by several fires, your voice a meager smoke rising from smoldering leaves, all your possessions boxed up in the back of your blue station wagon, which fell so deeply asleep on the cot of our land, it never woke up again. After your mother died, you disappeared. We had to have your car towed and stowed your boxes in the barn, just in case you ever came back. I found your Bible one day, a farm boy boredom. The list of family births and deaths was written in pencil in your perfect hand, your mother still alive according to the dash. I carried the book the way a boy carries a turtle and hid it in my desk under mundane books. The passages that had moved you, you had underlined in faint graphite. Mostly you marked the red words of Christ. I gave up on the book in the midst of a tedious list of names and begats. Then, last summer, in Santa Maria del Popolo in Rome, I saw you being crucified upside down forever, fading in the photographer's flashes. I wanted to look at you. After all, you were looking at me, or towards me at least, and clearly I had only come all that way to see you. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the filthy feet of the man groaning to heave your cross upright, one soul blackened, like he had walked barefoot through a house, burned down to its foundation, kneeling from time to time to pick nails out of the ash. Okay, I have two more. Take a sip of water. So, this next poem is addressed to a scarecrow. We never really had a scarecrow on a farm, but I imagine one. So, this poem is called The Scarecrow. I lent you an old flannel shirt and jeans my legs had flooded, and a hat we found in the ditch one Sunday on the way to Mass. No shoes because you wouldn't be walking. No lips because you'd have no lover. Just 2 buttons sewn in your burlap head so you could be respectably blind. You had no mind burning in your skull, no capacity for anything but decayed hay. A horny cricket would have to do for a heart, and it would be dark and small and involved with itself. This is why we envied you, you whose only task was to be a whore. No one asked you to be beautiful, your business was repulsion, but you failed because I kept returning to you. Walking to school to give a speech, fear already curdling in my throat, I saw you grandiose in a pose of oratory, your staked arms spread wide, your audience of sweet corn nodding, all ears. Maybe a hearse passed you, its 500 mechanical horses prancing nobly, bearing Mr. McGregor. You alone felt no fear, did not shudder or take off your hat. And when, years later, we finally threw you to the literal dogs, you felt no pain, and your body seeded the yard. While you were you, no one prayed to you, though you hung there on your crucifix. Only the fireflies lit the votive candles of themselves for you, and didn't even mean to. But some nights, I'd walk out into the aura of your deafness to keep you company, thinking you must have been lonely. Even the crows were afraid of you. Entire murders kept a good mile from you, cawing in awe of you. I suppose fear is a kind of worship. Still, I felt sorry for you the way I felt sorry for the old farmers I saw, Sundays alone in the pews, trying to turn up the tiny dials of their hearing aids, forgetting they were as loud as they could be. As I grew older, I visited you less and less, until shame became its own reason for avoiding you. On the last evening of your long death, before you embarked on your afterlife as wheat, I went up to you, took your hand of hay and mine of flesh, and said goodbye. The next morning, all that was left were your clothes piled in the corner of the barn, the blonde mulch of your body on the lawn, and the murder settling around your naked cross of rebar, still staked crooked in the ruined garden. Okay, I have one poem left. It's a bit long. Another drink of water for it. And like Marielle's poem, this poem is for my grandfather, and I want to dedicate it to my parents who came all this way from Wisconsin to see the reading. So this poem is called Will. At your wake, which was your sleep, I saw your son, my father, place an envelope of dirt in the breast pocket of your coffin coat. I want to give you something too, so you may rest in the company of things you loved, the way Egyptian pharaohs were buried, with what it was thought they'd need beyond death. And so with you, I bury 300 cubic acres of soil, with all that soil is, its living and dead seeds, its cicadas asleep for 17 summers, its worms, its arrowheads, with you also, trees you loved, yes, even those still bright with life, I lay them beside you, root and branch, young trees of 20 and old trees of 100 rings, trees singed by lightning. Of course, you may have the tarnished fork of lightning too, to eat the nothingness that will sustain you, the tree the foxes love to dig dens under. Fine, you get to keep one of them too, but only the smallest and least likely to live. The rest get to go free. Sure, why not all 20 acres of woods? And all the woods include its birds, the meadow in its heart, like the peace of nuns, the fascicles of its birch bark, the fictive countries of its leaves, both held and fallen, its deer, beneath the river mouths of their antlers, the deer stand, missing several necessary rungs, thistles, the three-sided shack. It can all go in, the snow of winter, scat of summer, owl pellets of autumn, violets of spring, everything, the fields themselves, the huge wreaths of windrows, the new corn, the shattered corn, shattered like bones in November light, every month's light for that matter, light of warm and cool evenings, and every evenings and mornings, all birds, even those just passing over, I will snatch whole flocks down from air and bury them with you, Grandpa. And yes, of course, you may have your tractors and wagons, all the boards and shingles and nails that compose the barns and sheds. Sure, I'll employ 2 tornadoes to take them down for you. And yes, you get their darkness too. Yes, their mice and chaff. Yes, you get back that screw you lost that day in 1952. Yes, you get back 1952, all of it. Every night she lay latticed in moonlight. Yes, laughter of your children, food you ate, ale you drank, all things that sustained you. Your work jeans, work shirts, your tools, pliers, hammers, screwdrivers, anvils, all of it. There's plenty of room, of course. The house, both houses, their materiality and their emptiness, all appliances, doorknobs, light fixtures, dishware, table leaves, all of it, anything you can take, like the hill of coal you kept in the basement, the green light of bad weather that poured in through the windows, the salt that softened the water, the bare and soul-swaying bulb, the tire swing you made for them, the books you gave them, the gifts you gave them, Christmas mornings, the simple, humble, barely affordable gifts you gave them. You get those back too. All that you gave comes back to you, Grandpa. This and nothing else is the promise of heaven. Bruises, advice, hugs, birth, charity, a shit. It all, anything you gave, comes back to you. Your father and your mother, sure, you get them, yes, even your mother, who you never met, who died giving birth, you get her back too. You worked so hard, you were so beautiful, so gentle. You get everything you thought you'd lost forever by dying. We lose nothing by dying. We get it all back. Thank you.